My father laughed when the lawyer handed me an envelope, a worn black card, and a one-way ticket to Monaco. My brother had just inherited the yacht, the luxury cars, and control of the company. Then my father leaned back and said, "Guess your grandfather didn't love you that much." But my mother didn't laugh. She slipped that black card into my hand and whispered, "Don't let them see it." I thought I had just been humiliated in front of my entire family. I had no idea my grandfather had handed me the key to a $90 million secret, and that their beautiful inheritance was already collapsing under the weight of their greed. Here's the part I couldn't stop thinking about. My family didn't laugh because the envelope looked small. They laughed because they thought it proved I was small. That's the kind of wound money can't explain, but betrayal can. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. Then stay with me, because what happened in that law office was only the first move. My father laughed before the lawyer even finished saying my name. That was the part I remember most clearly. Not the mahogany table, not the brass clock ticking behind Attorney Hollis Brandt's shoulder, not the rain streaking down the tall windows of that old office in Annapolis. It was my father's laugh. Sharp, certain, like he had been waiting years for proof that I mattered less. We were 3 days past my grandfather Corwin Durst's funeral, and the whole family had gathered to divide what he left behind. My older brother Blaine sat across from me in a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. My father, Murdoch, looked calm and polished, one hand folded over the other like a man about to receive what he believed he was owed. My mother, Dolores, sat beside him with her purse clutched in her lap. She hadn't looked at me once since I walked in. I took the last chair at the end of the table. That suited everyone just fine. Grandpa had been the only person in that family who never treated me like extra furniture. I was 32, working long shifts as a paramedic in Baltimore, and to my father that meant I had failed to become useful. Blaine had business cards, golf friends, and opinions about markets he barely understood. I had calloused hands, a tired back, and a habit of showing up when people needed me. Grandpa understood that. He never asked for much, just time, and somehow I was the only one willing to give it. I fixed loose lines on his boat, drove him to appointments when his knees started giving him trouble, sat with him through quiet afternoons when he didn't want advice, just company. So when Hollis began reading the will, a small, foolish part of me hoped Grandpa had left me something that said, "I saw you." Not money, not property, just proof. Blaine received the yacht first, then the cars, then a large share in Durst Marine Logistics. My father received commercial properties, investment accounts, and controlling authority over several family holdings. Every announcement made Blaine sit taller. Then Hollis turned a page, to my grandson, Talon Durst. The room shifted. I felt every eye move toward me. Hollis cleared his throat. "I leave one sealed envelope, one one-way ticket to Monaco, and the black card held in safekeeping by Dolores Durst." Silence. Then my father smiled, not kindly. "Guess your grandfather didn't love you that much," he said. Blaine leaned back, laughing under his breath. "A plane ticket? That's generous." Maybe he figured you needed a vacation from being disappointed. A few relatives looked down at the table, pretending they hadn't heard. That almost hurt worse. Nobody defended me. Nobody even had the decency to look ashamed. I stood slowly. Blaine lifted the yacht keys between 2 fingers. "Don't worry, little brother. Some of us were born to handle responsibility." I looked at him, then at my father. Every answer I could have given would have sounded small in that room. So I gave them nothing. No argument, no pleading, no performance. I walked toward the door. Just before I reached the hallway, my mother rose so quietly nobody noticed. Her hand brushed mine. Something cold and thin slipped into my palm. The black card. Her fingers closed around mine for half a second. "Don't let them see it," she whispered. Before I could ask what she meant, she stepped back into place beside my father. Outside, I sat in my truck with the rain tapping the windshield. My hands were steady now, which surprised me. I opened the envelope. Inside was the ticket, and a note in Grandpa's handwriting. "Trust me one last time. Read the wind." I stared at those words until the office lights blurred through the rain. The ticket said Monaco. I had no idea that one decision would destroy everything my family thought they had won. I didn't drive home right away. I sat in that parking lot until the rain softened into mist and the office windows went dark behind me. The envelope lay open on the passenger seat. The black card sat on top of the ticket, dull and scratched, like something someone had forgotten in a drawer for 20 years, Monaco. It sounded ridiculous sitting there in my old truck, parked a few blocks from the Annapolis harbor, with my work boots still muddy from a call I'd run 2 nights earlier in Baltimore. Men like Blaine flew to Monaco. Men like my father knew people who vacationed there. Men like me worked double shifts, packed lunch in plastic containers, and checked their bank accounts before buying tires. Still, Grandpa's handwriting was there. Trust me, one last time. Read the wind. I drove back to my apartment after midnight. The streets were slick, the town quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your own thoughts too loud. When I got inside, I put the ticket and card on my kitchen table, then stood there staring at them like they might explain themselves. They didn't. What I heard instead was my father's voice. Guess your grandfather didn't love you that much. That sentence landed in a place I hated admitting I still had. A place that had been waiting for proof that maybe they were right about me all along. Maybe I really was the extra son, the one who helped but never mattered, the one people called dependable when they meant ordinary. The next afternoon, Blaine sent me a photo. He was standing on Grandpa's yacht, one hand on the polished rail, sunglasses on, grinning like he'd earned the water under him. The caption read, "Some people inherit responsibility, others inherit envelopes." I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then set the phone face down. I could have answered. I could have told him he hadn't visited Grandpa on that boat once in the last 2 years. I could have reminded him he got seasick in calm water and called the marina the parking lot for old men. But arguing with Blaine was like throwing stones into the bay. You made a splash, and then everything went right back to the way it was. Growing up, Blaine was the future. That was the word my father used, future. At dinners, at business events, at family Christmas parties where I stood holding a paper plate while adults asked Blaine about college, internships, markets, leadership, then they'd turn to me and say, "And what are you up to these days?" Not because they cared, because manners required it. There were family photos lining my parents' hallway. Blaine in a sailing blazer. Blaine shaking hands with my father at some award dinner. Blaine beside Grandpa at a company picnic, even though he left early that day because he was bored. Me? I appeared in the background sometimes. Half a shoulder. A blurred face. A kid standing near the edge, waiting to be invited closer. Sometimes the deepest rejection isn't being hated. It's realizing nobody bothered to notice you at all. Maybe you know that feeling. Maybe you've sat in a room full of people with your last name and still felt like a guest. Grandpa noticed. He never asked how much I made. He never asked when I planned to do better. He asked whether I was sleeping enough after long EMS shifts, whether I'd eaten before coming over, whether the job had been hard that week. Once, after a bad call, I sat with him on the dock and said almost nothing for an hour. He didn't push. He just handed me a thermos of coffee and pointed at the water. "Read the wind, Talon," he said. I was 26 then, old enough to know he wasn't just talking about sailing. "People show you who they are before they tell you," he said. "Watch what moves when nobody thinks you're looking." I thought about that while turning the black card under my kitchen light. No bank name, no numbers, no magnetic strip. Just a small engraved crown near one corner, worn smooth from age. Below it were 2 letters, L.V. I called my mother that evening. She answered on the 4th ring, voice low. "Talon, what is this card?" Silence moved between us. "Mom, I can't explain it over the phone." "Then explain it in person. I shouldn't have even given it to you where they might see." Her breath trembled. "Your grandfather made me promise." "Promise what?" "That if this day came, I'd put it in your hand and say nothing else." I looked down at the card again. "Why?" Her voice dropped so softly I almost missed it. "Because you wouldn't believe me." Then the line went quiet. Not disconnected, just her, sitting somewhere in that house, too afraid to finish the truth. The days before the flight passed strangely. I worked 2 shifts. Packed 1 suitcase. Paid rent early because practical habits don't disappear just because your dead grandfather sends you across the ocean. My father called the night before I left, not to ask if I was safe, not to ask what Grandpa had written. "You're not planning to contest anything, are you?" he asked. I almost laughed. "No." He exhaled like a man relieved of a minor inconvenience. "Good. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." That told me more than any confession could. At BWI the next afternoon, I stood in line with the black card inside my jacket pocket. When I boarded, the crown on it caught a strip of cabin light as I took my seat. For one brief second, I wondered if Grandpa hadn't left me an inheritance at all. Maybe he had left me a key. 7 hours later, somewhere above the Atlantic Ocean, I would discover why my grandfather spent 30 years hiding a secret powerful enough to change my life forever. I didn't sleep much on the flight. Somewhere over the Atlantic, while the cabin lights were dim and most people around me had their blankets pulled up to their chins, I took the black card from my jacket pocket and held it under the small reading light above my seat. L.V. A crown. No numbers, no strip, no explanation. Just a piece of worn metal my mother had been afraid to let my father see. By the time we landed in Nice, my body felt heavy from travel, but my mind was wide awake. The airport was bright, polished, and full of voices I couldn't understand quickly enough. French on signs, French over speakers, people moving with the easy confidence of folks who belong there. I did not. I was a paramedic from Baltimore with one suitcase, a wrinkled jacket, and a plane ticket from a dead man. At baggage claim, I was reaching for my bag when a man in a charcoal suit stepped beside me. "Talon Durst?" I turned slowly. "That's me." He gave a small nod. "My name is Adrien Laurent. We've been expecting you." That sentence should have comforted me. It didn't. It made everything feel less like a mistake and more like a plan I had walked into without understanding the rules. "I think there may be some confusion," I said. Adrian's eyes moved to my hand. I hadn't realized I was holding the card. The change in him was immediate, not dramatic, not theatrical, but clear enough. His posture straightened, his expression softened into something close to respect. "May I?" I handed it to him. He didn't flip it over casually like a hotel key. He held it with both hands, careful, as if it belonged in a museum. Then he returned it the same way. "Your grandfather kept his word," he said. I stared at him. "You knew my grandfather?" Adrian glanced toward the exit. "The person you need to ask is waiting in Monaco." The drive took less than an hour, but it felt like crossing into another life. The Mediterranean spread beside the road, clean and blue, in a way the Chesapeake never was. Yachts sat in the harbor like floating mansions. Buildings rose from hillsides in cream, stone, and glass. Everything looked expensive, but not loud. That was what unsettled me most. Real wealth, I realized, didn't need to announce itself every 5 seconds like Blaine did. We stopped at a private estate tucked above the water. No gold gates, no parade of guards, just old stone, quiet windows, and men who knew exactly where to stand. Inside, Adrian led me through a hall lined with framed nautical charts. At the end of it, an elderly man waited near a balcony. He was tall, silver-haired, and dressed simply, but there was a stillness around him that made the room seem arranged around his presence. "Mr. Durst?" he said. His accent was soft, his English precise. "I am Lucien Valmont, L.V., the initials on the card." My fingers tightened around the edge of my suitcase handle. He studied my face for a long moment, and then his expression changed. The formality faded. "You have Corwin's eyes," he said. I had expected questions, maybe legal language, maybe some explanation involving banks and paperwork. I was not prepared for grief in a stranger's voice. "You knew him well?" I asked. Lucien looked toward the sea. "Better than almost anyone." He invited me to sit in a private room overlooking the harbor. Adrian brought coffee, then stepped out. On the low table between us sat an old photograph. 2 younger men on a boat, sunburned and laughing. One was my grandfather. I recognized his jaw, his hands, the way he leaned forward as if the wind itself had told him a joke. The other man was Lucien. "In 1987, he began. "A storm caught us off the coast. I was not the sailor your grandfather was. I went overboard. Corwin went after me." He paused. His hand rested on the edge of the photograph. He saved my life. After that, friendship became too small a word for what we were. I didn't know what to say. My family had treated Grandpa like an old man with a boat and a business. Meanwhile, he had carried a life I'd never heard about. Lucien continued. Corwin had advised him privately for decades. Maritime routes, port investments, logistics infrastructure, real estate tied to shipping corridors. Later, clean energy vessels and navigation technology. It was legal, confidential, and built on trust. Your grandfather disliked attention, Lucien said. He had no interest in appearing powerful. He preferred being useful. That sounded like him. Then Lucien looked directly at me. He spoke of you often. My throat tightened before I could stop it. Me? Always you. Not because of your salary, not because of a title. He said you were the one who showed up when there was nothing to gain. I looked away toward the harbor. What hurts more? Being left behind? Or spending years believing you were left behind when someone had been speaking your name with pride the whole time? Lucien reached for a folder and placed it in front of me. The card identifies Corwin's chosen successor for a private advisory trust. It does not give you a throne. It does not give you permission to act foolishly. It gives you responsibility. I opened the folder just enough to see my name. Then I saw the figure. $90 million. The room seemed to narrow around that number. Lucien gently closed the folder before I could read further. Tomorrow, he said, calm but firm. Before you understand what he left you, you must understand what he left them. I looked up. He didn't smile. The inheritance your family celebrated was not the victory they think it was. The next morning, I would learn that my family's inheritance wasn't a gift at all. It was a trap my grandfather had spent years designing. I barely slept that night. The hotel room was quiet, too quiet for a man used to sirens, radios, and ambulance doors slamming shut at 3 a.m. Monaco glittered outside the window like another planet, but all I could think about was my father laughing in that law office. The next morning, Adrian picked me up at 9 sharp and brought me back to Lucien's private office. Coffee waited on the table, untouched. Beside it were folders, spreadsheets, insurance summaries, dockage contracts, loan schedules, and maintenance projections. Lucien did not begin with the 90 million. He began with my family. Your father and brother saw victory, he said, opening the first file. Corwin saw weight. He slid one sheet toward me. The yacht Blaine had bragged about was beautiful, no question. But beauty had a bill. Docking fees, crew retainers, insurance. Repairs deferred for 2 seasons because Grandpa had refused to pour more money into something he knew Blaine would treat like a trophy. Then came the cars. Several were tied to storage contracts and specialty insurance. One had a loan attached through a family holding company. The waterfront properties my father celebrated carried tax obligations and renovation requirements that would eat cash fast. I stared at the papers. He left them expensive problems. Lucien's eyes stayed calm. He left them what they respected. That sentence sat heavy between us. Then Adrian brought out the company reports. Durst Marine Logistics looked solid from the outside, but underneath, it was held together by relationships Grandpa had built over decades. European carriers, port brokers, old handshake agreements that still mattered because Corwin Durst had never broken his word. My father believed contracts kept a business alive. Grandpa knew trust did. Lucien tapped one page. Several partners renewed because of Corwin personally, not because of your father. I almost smiled, but it wasn't joy. It was the strange feeling of seeing a truth you had sensed for years, finally written in ink. Then, Lucien opened the file marked with my name. The trust was real, $90 million, but it was locked behind rules, stewardship clauses, training requirements, oversight, no reckless withdrawals, no transfer to family members. No using the Valmont name for personal deals. Grandpa had not handed me a pile of money. He had handed me a test. By that afternoon, trouble was already drifting in from Maryland. My mother called while I was sitting alone on a stone bench outside the office. Her voice sounded thin. Blaine is posting pictures from the yacht, she said. Your father says it's good for the company image. What do you think? She was quiet for a moment. I think your grandfather would hate it. That was the first honest thing she had said in days. Then she added, softer, Talon, I knew he had a plan. Not all of it, but enough. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was afraid. No excuse followed. No dramatic speech. Just that simple admission from a woman who had spent most of her marriage folding herself smaller to keep the peace. I should have protected you better, she said. I looked out at the harbor, at boats moving over water Grandpa would have loved. Yes, I said. You should have. She cried quietly, and I let the silence stay. I wasn't ready to comfort her for the pain she helped create. Before she hung up, her tone changed. Your father is asking questions. What kind? About Monaco, about the card, about your grandfather's old files. She paused. He thinks you know something. Of course he did. Men like my father never believed they missed anything. If they were surprised, someone must have cheated. That evening, Lucien received a report from an investigator he had kept on retainer. He handed it to me without comment. My father had hired forensic accountants, not to save the company, not to protect employees, to find hidden assets he believed Grandpa had given me. I looked up. Will they find anything? Lucien closed the folder with one finger. They will find exactly what Corwin wanted them to find. 2 weeks later, my father's search would uncover a document that convinced him I had stolen the family fortune, and that accusation would change everything. The report stayed on the table between Lucien and me long after he left the room. I kept reading the same sentence over and over, trying to understand how my father's mind worked. He had inherited properties, stock, cars, authority, and more control than he deserved. Still, the first thing he did was search for whatever he believed I had. That was the thing about people like Murdoch Durst. They didn't just want to win. They needed you to lose quietly so they could call it order. 2 weeks passed in Monaco with a strange rhythm. Mornings were spent in Lucien's office, learning terms I had only heard in passing before. Asset structures, maritime infrastructure, private holdings, compliance review. Afternoons, Adrian helped me understand what Corwin had built, piece by piece, without ever making me feel stupid for asking basic questions. Then, one Thursday, before sunrise, my phone started buzzing. At first, I thought it was an emergency call from back home. Old habit. My hand reached for the phone before my eyes were fully open. 12 missed calls, 4 voicemails. Messages from cousins who had not spoken to me since Christmas. One from Blaine. You need to explain yourself. Then another. You always played the victim. Nice act. I sat up in bed, the room still dark except for the thin line of light under the curtains. My father had found something. By breakfast, the story had already spread through the family. According to him, I had manipulated Grandpa before he died. I had hidden assets. I had run to Monaco because I knew the truth would catch up with me. He told relatives that I had taken advantage of an old man's affection, which was a polished way of calling me a thief without having proof. A cousin named Meredith sent me one message that stayed with me. If you're innocent, why won't you just tell everyone what's really in Monaco? I typed 3 different replies and deleted all of them because the truth was not something they wanted. They wanted access. They wanted numbers. They wanted a version of the story where Grandpa's choice made sense without requiring them to examine themselves. By noon, my father had an attorney send a formal letter requesting clarification on foreign interests connected to Corwin Durst's estate. It was not a lawsuit yet. It was pressure. A warning shot dressed up in legal language. Blaine was less subtle. He posted a picture of himself on Grandpa's yacht with the caption, "Family legacy should stay with family." I almost laughed when I read it. Not because it was funny, because the man had visited Grandpa's boat fewer times than he had visited his tailor. Still, that night, the weight of it got to me. I walked back to my hotel after a long day at Lucien's office and sat on the edge of the bed without turning on the lights. Monaco shimmered outside, elegant and distant, while my phone kept lighting up on the nightstand. For a moment, I thought about leaving the whole fight behind. Not Monaco, the fight. Maybe silence would be easier. Maybe defending myself was just another way of begging them to see me. Maybe peace, even fake peace, cost less than truth. Have you ever reached a point where being misunderstood felt less exhausting than proving yourself over and over? That was where I was. Lucien noticed the next morning. He didn't give me a speech. He invited me for coffee on the terrace, and told me a story about Corwin. Years earlier, a business partner had accused Grandpa of cutting him out of a deal. People believed it for a while because the lie was louder than the truth. "What did he do?" I asked. Lucian stirred his coffee once. He waited. "That's it?" He gathered records. He let the man speak until the contradictions became visible. Lucien looked at me then. "Your grandfather did not fight to win arguments. He fought to protect reality." That sentence followed me into the office. Later that afternoon, I was assigned to review a small shipping technology proposal with a young analyst named Soren. He was bright, careful, and clearly nervous. Twice during the meeting, a senior associate repeated Soren's idea as if it were his own. Soren just lowered his eyes and let it happen. I saw myself in him so clearly, it irritated me. After the meeting, I found him in the hallway and said, "That routing model was yours." He looked startled. "It doesn't matter." "Yes, it does." He gave a tired half smile. "People like me don't make noise in rooms like that." I stood there longer than I meant to, because that was the lie I had lived with too. That evening, Adrian knocked on my office door and handed me a padded envelope. "It arrived from Maryland," he said. "No sender." Inside were copies of company records, financial statements, internal emails, old invoices, expense authorizations marked as operational development, but the descriptions told a different story. Luxury event costs, private club dues, renovations charged through business accounts, consulting fees paid to firms tied to Blaine's friends. At first, it looked messy. Then the pattern sharpened. Durst Marine Logistics had not started failing when Grandpa died. It had been bleeding for years. My father and Blaine had disguised image building as business growth, and Grandpa had quietly covered the damage to protect employees and clients. Near the bottom of the envelope was one small page in Grandpa's handwriting. "Read the wind before the storm becomes visible." I sat back slowly. He had not left me evidence for revenge. He left it for timing. And for the first time since I arrived in Monaco, I stopped asking whether I should speak. I started asking when. 3 days later, my brother crossed a line so reckless that silence was no longer an option. 3 days after that envelope arrived from Maryland, Blaine went on a regional business podcast and turned my grandfather's name into a weapon. I watched the clip from a small conference room in Monaco, with Adrian standing near the window and Lucien seated across from me. The host asked Blaine about taking on a larger role in the Durst legacy, and at first, Blaine played it perfectly. Smooth voice, good lighting, navy jacket. The kind of smile people use when they want strangers to think they were raised with discipline. Then the conversation shifted. "Families can get complicated after a patriarch passes," the host said. "Has the transition been difficult?" Blaine leaned back like he had been waiting for permission. "Difficult, yes, especially when certain people who were never involved suddenly show up with questions, foreign connections, and emotional claims." He never said my name. He didn't have to. My phone started buzzing before the clip even ended. A former coworker from Baltimore texted, "Is he talking about you?" A cousin wrote, "You need to stop embarrassing the family." Then one from Blaine himself. "You brought this on yourself," I called him. Not because I thought he would listen, because some lines deserve to be marked before they're crossed again. He answered on the second ring. "Well, look who finally decided to be transparent. Stop turning Grandpa into a weapon," I said. There was a short laugh on the other end. Same laugh from the law office. Polished, careless, practiced. "You're in Monaco playing mystery air, and I'm the one disrespecting him? You know what you implied." "I implied the truth. You vanished with some secret card, and now everyone's supposed to pretend that's normal? Blaine, you received the yacht, the cars, and company authority. You got exactly what you wanted." His voice sharpened. "And you still found a way to make yourself the victim." I looked down at the table. Lucien was watching quietly, saying nothing. Then Blaine said it. "If Granddad thought you mattered, he would have left you something people could actually see." That sentence did not break me. Not anymore. But it told me something important. My brother had inherited Grandpa's possessions and understood none of them. I ended the call without answering. For the next few nights, I slept badly. Not from fear, exactly. From arithmetic, the kind nobody teaches you. If I exposed everything, employees at Durst Marine Logistics could suffer. People with mortgages, kids in college, retirement plans. My mother's whole life was tied to that company, whether she admitted it or not. But if I stayed silent, Blaine's lies would keep spreading. My father would keep framing greed as concern. Grandpa's reputation would be dragged through the same mud they had always tried to keep off their own shoes. That was the trap. Speak, and I might help collapse what Grandpa built. Stay quiet, and I would help them bury the truth. Lucien found me early one morning on the terrace, long before the office filled. He brought 2 coffees and set one in front of me. "You're thinking like a good man," he said. "I don't feel like one. Good men rarely do when every choice hurts." I gave a tired laugh. "That's supposed to make me feel better?" "No, it is supposed to make you careful." He looked out toward the water. "The truth is expensive, Talon, but lies collect interest." That stayed with me. By noon, more documents came from the anonymous source inside the company. This batch was worse. Internal emails, altered summaries, risk reports that had been softened before they reached minority investors. Nothing that looked like a movie crime. No dramatic smoking gun. Just the ordinary dishonesty of men protecting their image. My father knew the company was unstable. Blaine knew certain accounts were being used to cover lifestyle costs and reputation projects. They had not been steering the ship. They had been painting the hull while water rose below deck. I didn't release everything publicly. That would have been satisfying, maybe, but reckless. Instead, I sent one message to my father, Blaine, the board chair, and their counsel. I kept it short. "I have documentation showing the company's actual financial condition, including reports not shared with key stakeholders. I recommend correcting the record voluntarily before further public statements are made about me or grandfather. No insults, no threats, only facts." The response came from my father 20 minutes later. "You have no idea what you're getting yourself into." Then Blaine sent his own. "Fabricated documents won't save you." By evening, their attorney accused me of sabotage. By midnight, Blaine was telling relatives I had gone after the family business. My father, naturally, believed the version that made him the victim. That was when Adrian knocked on my office door. He carried a sealed gray folder, thinner than the others. No logo, no typed label. Just my name written across the front in Grandpa's hand, Talon. Inside was a flash drive and a note from Lucien's archive staff. "Private video recording, Corwin Durst. Recorded 6 months before death. Release only to designated successor, me." I held the drive in my palm for a long time. Adrian asked, "Will you watch it now?" I looked at the dark window, at my reflection looking older than it had a month earlier. "No," I said, "not yet." Because by then I had learned something from Grandpa after all. You don't use the wind the moment you feel it. You wait until it can move the sail. The next morning, I finally watched my grandfather's recording, and within 5 minutes, I understood why he had hidden it from everyone. I waited until the harbor was fully awake before I played the recording. There are things you don't want to meet in the dark. My grandfather's voice was one of them. I made coffee I barely touched, opened the balcony door, and let the morning air move through the apartment. The black card sat beside my laptop. For some reason, I placed it there before pressing play, like it belonged in the room for whatever came next. The video began with Grandpa sitting in his old study in Annapolis. Same green reading chair, same framed chart of the Chesapeake behind him. He looked thinner than I remembered, his collar a little loose, his hands folded over the head of his cane. But his eyes were still his, clear, steady, watching the world without asking permission from it. "Talon," he said, and I had to pause the video after one word. I stood, walked to the sink, gripped the counter, and breathed until I could sit again. Then I played it. "If you're watching this," he continued, "it means they still think wealth is ownership instead of responsibility." No greeting, no soft opening. Grandpa never wasted a sentence. He talked about family, but not the way people do at holiday dinners. He spoke of disappointment, not anger. Disappointment. The kind that comes when you give people every chance to grow and they keep choosing appetite over character. "I did not leave your father and brother those assets to punish them," he said. "I left them what they kept reaching for. If a man worships appearances, eventually appearances will send him the bill. I leaned back slowly. That was Grandpa. Quiet enough to be mistaken for gentle, sharp enough to cut through steel. He explained why he had never confronted Murdoch and Blaine publicly. Not because he was weak, not because he didn't know, because he understood people like them better than I did. Exposure rarely changes the arrogant, he said. Consequences do. Then he looked straight into the camera. And you, son, are not here to destroy them. You're here to stop protecting them from the truth. That line settled somewhere deep. For years, I thought keeping peace meant staying silent, letting insults pass, letting Blaine take credit, letting my father talk over me at tables where I had earned my seat just by surviving the family I was born into. Grandpa was telling me something different. Silence could be wisdom, but silence could also become shelter for people doing harm. The rest of the recording was not emotional in the usual way. It was practical. Names, dates, patterns. Grandpa knew where Murdoch and Blaine were careless. Their weakness was not lack of intelligence, it was certainty. They assumed nobody else paid attention. Emails, side agreements, edited reports, board summaries missing key risks. They leave trails, Grandpa said, because they believe no one they dismiss is capable of following them. I almost smiled. Not happily. With recognition. After the recording ended, I sat there until the screen went dark. Outside, a yacht moved across the water, clean and white under the sun. Inside, the room felt changed. I opened every file again. The financial statements, the anonymous records, the letters from partners, the reports my father's team had softened before showing investors. One by one, the pieces lined up. Debt was not the biggest danger. Credibility was. If the board lost trust, the company would shake. If partners confirmed what they had seen, the story my father built would crack. If Grandpa's video appeared at the right moment, not as revenge, but as evidence, then Blaine's lies would fold under their own weight. So, I stopped reacting. I started preparing. With Lucian's guidance, I contacted 3 former European partners, not to ask for loyalty, not to trade on the Valmont name. I simply asked whether they would verify why they had stepped back from Durst Marine. One Dutch executive, Pieter van Alst, spoke to me over a video call from Rotterdam. He had known Grandpa for 25 years. We didn't leave because Corwin died, he said. We left because integrity died. I wrote that down by hand, not because I needed to remember it, because my father needed to hear it. Back in Maryland, pressure was building. Board members wanted answers. Investors were reviewing statements. Even local business reporters had begun noticing that Blaine's story kept changing. He blamed market pressure one day, foreign interference the next, and family complications whenever he wanted sympathy. The more he talked, the less steady he sounded. My mother called once during that week. Her voice carried that old carefulness, like Murdoch might be standing in the hallway. "Talon," she said, "your father is angry. He's usually angry. No, this is different. He thinks you're trying to take everything from him." I looked at the black card on my desk. I'm trying to stop him from burning down what Grandpa built. She was quiet. Then she said, "He won't hear it that way." I know. When we hung up, I made the decision. Not a public leak, not a social media war, not a shouting match with Blaine. A special shareholders meeting. One room. The board, council, key investors, and any partner willing to speak on record. Facts would do what feelings never could. I booked my flight to Baltimore that night. Before closing my laptop, I picked up the black card and held it under the lamp. For most of my life, I thought power meant being loud enough to make people listen. Grandpa had taught me better. Power was knowing when to speak, so the truth had nowhere left to hide. 3 days later, as I boarded a flight back to Maryland, my father launched one final attack. An attack designed to destroy my reputation before I ever entered that boardroom. By the time my plane landed at BWI, the damage had already been done. I turned my phone on while the passengers around me were pulling bags from overhead bins. The screen filled with messages, links, missed calls, and one local business article my former captain sent with only 3 words, "Call me soon." The headline was careful, but the meaning was not. Questions, surround Durst grandson's Monaco trip after founder's death. Anonymous sources claimed I had pressured Grandpa. Hidden foreign accounts were mentioned. Offshore assets. Elder influence. All the right phrases to make strangers suspicious and family members feel justified. My father had timed it perfectly. I hadn't even stepped into Maryland yet, and he had already tried to make me look guilty. At the Durst Marine Logistics headquarters near the harbor, the boardroom felt colder than I remembered. Not because of the air conditioning, because everyone had chosen a side before I walked in. Some investors avoided my eyes. A few board members nodded politely, the way people nod at someone they hope won't cause trouble. My mother sat at the far end of the room, pale and quiet. Blaine looked pleased with himself. My father stood when I entered, adjusting his cuffs like he was about to address a congregation. "Talon," he said, voice smooth. "I'm glad you decided to come back and face the family." There it was. Not the company, not the board, the family. He always used that word when he wanted obedience. The meeting began with his performance. He spoke about grief, legacy, responsibility, how difficult it had been to manage confusion after Grandpa's passing. Blaine backed him up, saying the company was healthy until outside distractions began affecting confidence. Then my father turned toward me. "We still don't know what was hidden in Monaco," he said. "We don't know what promises were made to my father in his final months. We don't know what Talon is truly seeking here." The room shifted. For a few minutes, I said nothing. That bothered him more than anger would have. Then he opened a folder and laid out selected emails, partial statements, and copies of transfers connected to the Valmont Trust. Not false exactly, worse. Curated, stripped of context, arranged to make me look like I had been circling Grandpa's estate from a distance. One investor looked directly at me. "Should this be reviewed independently?" Blaine leaned back. "That's all we've been asking for." For one breath, the room was his. Then I reached into my bag and took out my own folder. Would everyone like to see the complete records instead of selected pages? Nobody spoke. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I started with dates. Then board reports, then internal emails, then altered summaries. The documents showed what had been hidden, who had seen the warnings, and how many times my father and Blaine had softened the truth before presenting it. A partner from Rotterdam joined by video and said the line I had written down days earlier. "We didn't leave because Corwin died. We left because integrity died." Blaine's face changed. My father's jaw tightened. Then I played Grandpa's recording. The room went still. Grandpa appeared on the screen, older and thinner, but steady as ever. "Talon never asked me for anything," he said. "If anyone claims otherwise, they are either mistaken or protecting themselves." My mother covered her mouth. Grandpa continued, explaining the card, Monaco, Lucien, the trust, and why he chose me. Not because I was rich, not because I was trained, because I showed up when there was nothing to gain. Then Prince Lucien appeared live on the conference screen. Calm, formal, unshakable. "I confirm every word," he said. Corwin Durst made these decisions years before his death, with full legal capacity and complete independence. That was when the room changed. Not loudly. No one gasped. No one shouted. They simply stopped looking at me like a suspect. Board members called for an independent audit. Investors demanded leadership review. Counsel began whispering in tight voices. Blaine kept staring at the table, as if the wood grain had answers. My father looked smaller than he had that morning. As people began leaving, he came toward me. For once, there was no sneer. "Was this what your grandfather wanted?" he asked. I looked at him, and I told the truth. "No. He wanted you to learn, before it got this far." He had no answer. That night, standing alone beside my grandfather's boat, I finally faced the question I had avoided for months. What happens after you win? Winning did not feel the way I expected it to feel. I thought there would be relief big enough to fill the empty places. I thought walking out of that boardroom with the truth finally spoken would undo the years of being dismissed, compared, and laughed at. It didn't. It simply made the room quiet. That night, I drove to the marina in Annapolis and stood beside Grandpa's boat until the harbor lights shimmered across the water. The air smelled like salt, fuel, and wet rope. Familiar things, honest things. The kind of things Grandpa trusted more than people in expensive suits. The investigations continued for months. Independent auditors came in. New management replaced my father's inner circle. The company survived, but not because anyone in my family saved it. It survived because the truth finally forced people to stop pretending everything was fine. That mattered to me. I never wanted the employees punished for my father's pride. Men and women had built lives around that company. Some had kids in college. Some were close to retirement. Grandpa would have cared about them before he cared about headlines. My father lost his authority. Blaine lost his position. Neither went to prison. This was not that kind of ending. Their punishment was quieter, and, for men like them, maybe worse. They lost credibility. They lost the room when they walked into it. Blaine called once, weeks after the audit began. He didn't apologize. He said, "You got what you wanted." I almost answered the old way, trying to explain myself. Instead, I said, "No, Blaine. I got what Grandpa protected." He hung up. That was our relationship after that. Not hatred, not forgiveness, distance. Some people call that sad. I call it honest. My father was harder. One afternoon in October, he came to the marina while I was checking the lines on the boat. He looked older. Not fragile, just reduced. Like a man who had spent his life standing on a stage and finally noticed the audience had gone home. He stood a few feet away and said nothing for so long I kept working. Finally, he said, "I underestimated you." 3 words. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I was wrong." But from Murdoch Durst, it was almost a confession. I looked at him and nodded. "You did." He seemed to expect more. Maybe anger, maybe gratitude, maybe that old hunger in me. The one that used to reach for even the smallest approval. But that hunger was gone. He left after 5 minutes. My mother came to see me the following week. She brought coffee in paper cups and sat with me on the dock, wrapped in a gray coat, looking out at the water like she was afraid the harbor might judge her too. "I kept that card for 11 years, she said. I turned toward her. "Your grandfather gave it to me after your 30th birthday dinner. The one where your father made that joke about your job." I remembered. Everyone had laughed when Dad said, "At least ambulances need drivers." I had smiled because that was what I used to do when something hurt too much to answer. Mom's eyes filled, but she didn't make a show of it. Corwin told me there might come a day when I'd have to choose courage over comfort. I failed at that more times than I can count. "Yes," I said quietly. "You did." She nodded, accepting it. That mattered more than any excuse. "But I didn't fail that day," she whispered. "I put the card in your hand." We did not fix everything on that dock. Life rarely ties itself into neat ribbons, but something opened between us. Not trust exactly, a path toward it. By winter, I was back in Monaco, working with Lucien. The $90 million trust remained mostly untouched. I had no interest in becoming the kind of man my family would finally respect for the wrong reasons. Instead, we started small and practical. Scholarships for EMT trainees, grants for maritime safety programs, funding for young analysts like Soren, who had been promoted after his routing model saved one of Lucien's shipping investments serious money. When I congratulated him, he said, "I didn't think anyone noticed." I smiled because I knew that sentence too well. Someone always should, I told him. One evening, Lucien and I sailed out of Monaco harbor. The Mediterranean was calm, but not still. Water is never still if you know how to look. I had the black card in my jacket pocket, the same card my father had laughed at, the same card my mother had hidden, the same card Grandpa had trusted to find its way back to me. I took it out and held it against my palm. It no longer felt like a mystery. It felt like a message. Real inheritance rarely looks valuable at first. Sometimes it arrives scratched, quiet, and easy to mock. Sometimes it comes in the shape of a choice no one else understands. As the sun dropped low, I unfolded Grandpa's note one last time. "Trust me, one last time. Read the wind." For years, I thought he gave them everything and gave me almost nothing. I was wrong. He gave them what they wanted. He gave me what I needed: a future, a compass, a chance to become the man he already believed I was. So let me ask you something. What would you have done if your whole family laughed at what you were given? Would you have chased revenge? Or would you have followed the one person who truly saw you? And has anyone ever believed in you before you knew how to believe in yourself? If they did, remember their name. People like that are rare. The wind never lied to my grandfather. And in the end, it didn't lie to me either.